It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And also, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast. We got lots to discuss here today on the program. I do want to draw your attention to, you heard Kelvin Hepner on the show yesterday with Lindsay Smith, talking about the situation at Cereals Canada. Kelvin has posted an update to that story that was in our morning email that went out to Western and Eastern Canadian subscribers. So encourage you, if you're not getting that email, you didn't have it in your inbox this morning, make sure you go to realagriculture.com/subscribe, and you can make sure you get on that free e-newsletter list. And that story is posted at realagriculture.com. Things are rather I don't want to be hyperbolic about it, but there's definitely some shakeups happening at Cereals Canada, which is the industry organization that involves value chain members from farmers all the way to grain companies. And there's a lot of stuff happening there that is creating some disruption right now. And encourage you to check out that story to stay on top of it. And we're going to definitely be talking about that on Friday on the Real Ag Issues panel as well. If you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you today. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Today's show is brought to you by Envita. You've heard us talk about Envita before here on the program. I definitely want you to check it out and learn more. You can do that by talking to your local retailer. Envita really bridges the nitrogen gap all season long. It enables your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where you need it most. Let Envita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer, as I mentioned. And we're going to be joined here today on the program by Tom Tregunno, who is with Exotic, the company that makes Envita. And he's going to talk about, what is Envita? What role does it play? Where does it fit in the crop production system? So we'll talk about that with him. We've got Chuck Penner here for a market update for a Real Ag Markets segment. He's with LeftField Commodity Research out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. We've got Al Mussell, who's a senior fellow with CAPI. He's going to talk about a paper that he just published, really thinking that Canada should focus on, when it comes to the climate and agriculture, then you think more about climate adaptation instead of mitigation. We'll talk about what the differences are there. And also Brian Ennis, Executive Director with Soy Canada. He's going to talk about the potential for gene editing and some of the things coming off of their AGM that happened last week. Let's take a break. When we come back, we got Chuck Penner of LeftField Commodity Research. Right after this, today's show is brought to you by Envita.
Choose Viatude fungicide and unleash best-in-class sclerotinia protection in canola and premium protection against white mold in soybeans. Viatude contains a powerful premix of Onmira Active and prothioconazole. This unique combo delivers high-performance disease control, crop safety, mix compatibility, resistance management, and advanced mobility for excellent coverage and superior plant protection. Choose Viatude fungicide for stronger, more vigorous crops.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through realagriculture.com and Real Ag Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience. Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
Peter Johnson at Wheat Pete, RealAgriculture.com, and What an opportunity! Oh my gosh! You think you can't grow better wheat? You are absolutely wrong. We're going to show you how to strive for those record wheat yields that they get in the UK and in New Zealand. You can grow 150 bushel wheat. I'll show you how.
Catch Wheat Beats Word every Wednesday on RealAgriculture.com or download the podcast on iTunes or Spotify. And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Envita. Envita bridges the nitrogen gap all season long, enabling your corn crop to fix the nitrogen it needs from the atmosphere when and where you need it most. Let Envita set your crop up for success by requesting it from your local retailer. Joining us right now to talk about the markets here on RealAg Radio is Chuck Penner of LeftField Commodity Research, based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Chuck, how are we doing?
It's a bright sunny day. We're just enjoying the warm weather and watching the crops starting to pop.
Yeah, and this is always a tough time of the year when you're trying to figure out, market direction, what you should do, shouldn't do from a risk management perspective. The weather is having an impact on the growing season, of course, in Canada and the U.S., but I guess what at this time of the year, what is normal seasonal behavior of the markets?
Down. The short answer is down. That was an easy. That was a softball. Anyway, yeah, that's what markets do. Even in 2021, when we had the huge drought, prices were heading lower even through the spring. Now they hit their seasonal lows earlier that year, but they still were declining at this time of year until I'm going to say into July, and then that's when they started to turn around. But this isn't 2021 this year. Yeah, there are problems in various spots, and that's inevitable. But this is far from a 2021 situation, so it's going to follow those seasonals. The difficulty is figuring out how much of these declines that we're seeing in canola and wheat and bunch of crops, how much of those declines are just the normal seasonal type of behavior, and how much of it is bigger stuff going on, and that varies depending on crop. And then there are some that are actually, like some of the minor crops, that are actually not following the seasonals lower. There's a couple of those, and so you wonder whether there's a bigger story there for these minor crops. Things like flax or canary seed or things like that, they're not going lower right now, so you wonder what's making that happen.
Yeah, what do they know that some of the majors don't know, or maybe they're just slow to catch on to what's really happening?
That could be too.
There is two ways to look at it. We have seen definitely declines in the majors: corn, soybeans, wheat, and canola, of course. Do you see a lot of downside risk from here, or like if you look at like November canola, just an example? Obviously, we're trying again to flirt with that 600.
Yep.
Is there downside risk below it at this point, or is this kind of a wait and see situation for harvest?
Well, I hate to say it, but the seasonals for canola usually bottom out in mid-August to mid-September.
So we got time then.
So we got a little bit of natural downward momentum, if you want to call it that, for the next number of weeks yet. So there is certainly some risk from that. Some of the things that are going on in the broader market could point to some recovery, but it may not happen until we actually get past harvest. Well, and of course that's when the seasonals start to go higher as well too. But things like a smaller Ukrainian crop, a smaller Australian crop, smaller European crop, those are all positives. But right now the market isn't trading those, and they're looking at. One of the things they're looking at is the Canadian crop, which, yeah, there are a few trouble spots, but on the whole, it's looking pretty good, better than it has for a few years, and so that's certainly weighing on things too. We'll get the acreage estimates from StatsCan tomorrow. Don't expect to see a big change for canola. It's going to be the yield that'll be the real variable for that size of the market. There is one thing that in the canola, if someone really wants to, cross their fingers and hold out hope, would be that the U.S. does something about this fake cooking oil, used cooking oil coming
UCO.
in. Yeah, coming into the U.S. If they were to shut off the tap on that, I mean, it would drive a whole lot more demand for Canadian canola seed to go down to U.S. crushers, and then also would keep our crushers running at full capacity. I mean, they're pretty much running full tilt anyway, so we can't add a whole lot more demand right there. But that would be a positive thing for soy oil and for canola oil and canola by extension.
And you look at the Western Canadian crop, and there are some trouble spots. So I don't want to broad brush it, like as you mentioned. But overall, we're in a lot better moisture situation. Of course, you look at the moisture map for Manitoba and Saskatchewan; it is epically better than it was at this time last year. A lot of growers waiting for the temperature to turn up. But even on a cereal crop, these have been ideal temperatures for cereals. Like, it is lining up here for things are kind of going. If you're like rooting for higher yields, things are lining up in a very nice order for you. Some growers have mentioned repeatedly, based on the lateness of some of the seeding and the fact that we haven't had much temperature, they're already starting to talk about frost risk for the fall. But we probably need to slow down a little bit from that aspect. Who knows what is in store for us, and that would be a big gamble, big gambling on an early frost.
And traders are certainly not going to be trading on that until it actually happens. Like, again, you get into mid-September, and even then, if you have an open fall, whatever, but they're not going to trade it until the canola crop, the late canola is dead. I mean, think about canola. Does it like hot temperatures? Does it like cool temperatures? I'm going to say cool, right? For flowering and setting seed and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's there, but I don't expect to see, on the thought that it might get frosted in fall. Nobody's going to trade that yet. And so that's what's going on there.
Yeah. You mentioned the StatsCan report for Western Canada. There's StatsCan, and then there's also USDA acreage this week as well. Just let's hit on both of those geographies, and what are the things to look out for as we get the next estimates?
Yeah, it'll be interesting, and more so. I mean, there's the corn and the bean numbers from the USDA and those kind of things. The general tendency is to think that both of those acreage will go up. Slightly, not huge changes, but there could always be surprises. I mean, these people like myself make these guesstimates of these numbers and things like that, and invariably there is a surprise, but I think it might be, yeah. I don't expect to see a huge amount, but that can always be the case. What I always look for in these is, because that's more my interest, are some of the smaller crops, and so you get things like mustard acreage in Canada and the U.S. The U.S. is a bigger player now in mustard production. Durum, oats, some of those that don't get much coverage or things like that. I was looking at some Reuters estimates of the Canadian, again, the analysts and traders ideas and things like that. And there's a huge range for a lot of these. So somebody is going to be surprised one way or the other. But for the most part, yeah, we could see a pretty strong reaction on Friday from the USDA report. The StatsCan numbers probably aren't going to move the market, I would say, because we're looking at probably pretty small changes in canola. The one thing that it won't catch is, because of the seeding delays, changes to, let's say, if people threw in some more barley late, or things like that, or what did they take out if they were delayed, or things like that. It wouldn't take into account the bigger sloughs that are out there that eat into acres, or those kind of things. Those kind of things won't get captured.
So for growers and trying to establish what their plan is, some people have a plan that, hey, I'm going to wait till harvest and see what I have on this 24 crop from a production standpoint. There's others that are, take a different approach and try to do some pre-selling, pre-contracting, using futures or options or delivery, pre-delivery. What should be things that you should be asking yourself or going through your head as you try to build your best marketing plan here at this point, at the the midway point, or I guess the end of June already? Man alive.
Yeah, it is. When you look at those kind of things, if you're in an area where, and again, a good chunk of Western Canada is looking at some pretty good conditions. And so we're getting into flowering on canola, we're getting to flag leaf on cereals, or even heading on a few cereals. So we're getting to that stage where there's not much that's going to hammer that crop yields. You could lose a little bit late, and again, this frost issue. But those crops are, I'm not going to call them made, but as you see your bins getting fuller than they have been the last couple of years, or those kind of things, you're going to be less and less sold. So if you had sold, 30% or pre-sold 30% or something like that, now maybe it's 20%. And so you're realizing that you've got more to get caught up on, or those kind of things. But again, not to get panicked by the seasonal declines. I think what we'll have to do is one of the words that I would use is patience. With guys who have old crop still left to sell, that's a hard spot to be in, and that sort of thing. But especially for new crop, I'm going to say be patient. Wait for these markets to do their normal seasonal recovery after harvest. This is just the worst time to sell a crop, and some of that panicky kind of selling late in the season is what drives the market even lower. So if we can remain patient to get through those, and then start to see the demand push those markets higher, and some of these I think will get oversold, like canola, wheat. I think is getting oversold. So again, it's waiting for that market to rally. If you want to sell some cash, buy some calls or something like that,
yep,
fine. That's not arguing with that kind of strategy, but in overall, for people who are just selling cash, just be patient.
Well, and since we are at the end of June, next week is a weird week, right? Because we got July 1st, Canada Day, we got July 4th. Could be a bit of a weird light trade day, which definitely your week, which can also move the markets in different directions when we're a little bit later on the liquidity on an intraday basis. And of course, in Canada, a lot of people looking to what does, both railways, if this strike actually does happen, and the impact of that on grain movement as we flip over to a new crop marketing year.
Yeah, for some reason, I don't know if it's coincidence, but they seem to have waited until we're approaching harvest to start to get serious about striking. And my gut reaction is that, yeah, it could disrupt things. I would think it wouldn't last long before the government would order them back to work, or to arbitration or whatever. I don't think that'll last long. So, cross your fingers. If it does happen, it'll just be maybe a week or something like that, and then we're back in business.
Yeah, if I'm farming
it does cause everything to back up. Yeah.
Yeah, if I'm farming really close to the border, I'm maybe thinking about, should I, just as a hedge or risk mitigation, haul some grain across the border and ship out through the BN and the PNW. That works for some, obviously not for all. Hey, Chuck, really do appreciate it. Thanks so much. Keep up the great work at LeftField Commodity Research.
Thanks, Shaun.
Really appreciate it. Okay, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Envita.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today. Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Envigor Hybrid Canola. It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, which is brought to you by today Envita. Very, very cool product, making a lot of inroads in the biological space. And we're going to be talking right now to the company that provides Envita. It is Azotic, and we're talking to Azotic's Global Business Development Manager. It is Tom Tregunno. Tom, it is great to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, okay, so let's back up a little bit here. I said, there are a lot of people who are excited about Envita. Let's talk about what exactly does Envita do? What is the product?
Yeah, sure. So what Envita is, it's a bacteria. It's called Gluconacidobacter diazotrophicus, which we call GD for short. So what Envita can do is it can be applied with your herbicide, your fungicides. It gets inside the plant cells, and that's where it fixes nitrogen. So really, we're talking about an alternative form of nitrogen that can fix nitrogen into a usable form right inside the plant cells. That really gives you an alternative form of nitrogen to get you through the season. So that's the main benefit to it. It's pretty flexible on how you want to use it. So you can either use it in furrow or it can be a foliar applied product.
And like we've been talking, we're not talking about pulses here. We're talking about corn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're talking about a bacteria that's capable of fixing nitrogen in other crops beyond legumes. So the vast majority of folks have been using it on corn. However, we're seeing tremendous benefits in potatoes and even some legume crops. Again, thinking it as a different mode of action in terms of nitrogen fixation. That's one way to look at it.
Speaking of potatoes, I had a potato grower mention it to me that they were seeing fantastic results. So, speaking of these results, what can farmers expect from Envita when they're using it?
Yeah, so very good question. And obviously, that depends on the crop you're growing and what your fertility rates are. The vast majority of the folks using it are comparing it at 100% of their fertility. So they're not changing their nitrogen down. Growers are going to use this. That's going to provide them the best ROI. The vast majority of the time, we're looking at this as standard fertility rates. Having said that, sometimes you're going to lose some nitrogen. It was a wet spring, obviously, this year. A lot of guys are losing their nitrogen. So I expect Envita to show a stronger benefit than it typically does, simply because the applied nitrogen would have been lost. On a typical year on corn, you're looking at a 68 bushel increase with current fertility. If you reduce your nitrogen, you're going to see a higher bump there. On potatoes, just on a very, very high result in potatoes. I mean, we're looking at over 30 hundredweight per acre, a typical response, and that's always at full fertility rate. But we're also seeing some good results in other crops too. I mean, beans have been pretty consistent. Again, it works a little differently, right? Rhizobia, the nitrogen fixation is occurring on those nodules. With Envita, it's fixing nitrogen directly in the cell. So one way to visualize it is think of a little nodule inside the plant cell. That's where the nitrogen fixation occurs. So it's providing a pretty quick form of nitrogen where you need it.
Yeah, you just hit on something there when you're talking about the results. If I am using Envita, should I be backing off my nitrogen or should I be leaving it at where I typically would have it?
It's probably the most common question. And we probably get asked that every day. How much nitrogen could I cut if I wanted to? And I mean, at the end of the day, it always is going to boil down to ROI. What's the best return on investment? The vast majority of the time when we've compared different fertility rates, again, it depends on what the price of nitrogen is, what the price of commodities are, but typically the best ROI is when fertility on corn is maintained. Having said that, that can change, and really it just kind of puts the farmer in charge of how they want to manage their nitrogen. And, if you're under pressure, reduce fertility. If it's something you want to look at, if there's nitrogen programs that are out there that or carbon programs that are going to incentivize you to do it, it's another tool you can use. If I just look at corn and look at when we do our fertility rates, and again, this changes and it's going to depend on soil type and growing conditions, but usually we're around about a 25% reduction in nitrogen to maintain yield on corn. Now, again, but even with today's fertility prices, most of the time you're better off at the full rate.
So for mainstream commercial ag in the U.S. and in Canada, where do you see biologicals headed in the future?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot coming. Obviously, there's, growers probably hear about a new biological every other day. I think ultimately the barriers to accepting a lot of these new products is the same as any other new product. They're going to want to see local efficacy trials. They're going to want to see a strong ROI. And I think that's partly going to take time to build that trust and to really figure out how to use them in your field and your farm. Part of what we try and do is understanding that there's not as much experience with them. We offer a demonstration performance guarantee program with this, where if you want to try this over a couple of years and you don't see an ROI with using Envita, we'll give you product again to try next year. And the idea is that, we recognize that this isn't going to work 100% of the time. There's going to be variabilities, and we want to work with folks that want to try these products over a few years and to build that grower experience in the countryside.
So, Tom, if somebody wants more information on Envita, of farming in Canada or the U.S., what do they do?
Best place to go is our website. That's www.azotic.com, exotic.com, or talk to your local retailer. It's widely available in both Canada and the U.S. So talk to your retailer, and they can get you some Envita. So.
Great stuff. Well, hey, Tom, thanks a lot for joining us and for being the sponsor of today's episode of RealAg Radio. Really appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thanks again.
Okay, that's the website, exotic.com, or, of course, you can always talk to your local retailer to source the product. Hey, we'll be right back on RealAg Radio. We're going to talk to Al Mussell of CAPI about a new report in terms of how he thinks that Canada needs to shift its strategy on the climate. You're listening to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Envita.
If you only listen to RealAg Radio, you only get half the picture. For greater insight into the issues that affect farming, tune in to RealAgriculture.com. Crops, livestock, machinery, farm management, and the markets, even food and travel. Real Agriculture Online digs deeper into the topics that affect the way you work and live. So get connected today. Read, watch, and listen to the people who know at RealAgriculture.com.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Shaun Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday. Well, there's lots happening in the world of policy development, and especially around environmental policy and what is Canada's best path forward and how this impacts the agricultural industry. Joining us next is Al Mussell. He's a senior fellow with CAPI, also research lead at Agri-Food Economic Systems, based out of Guelph, Ontario. Al, great to have you back on the show.
It's great to be on, Shaun.
Okay, Al, you got a paper out talking about how, now this is interesting, and just a slight twist here in the sense that your belief is that Canada, when it comes to climate change policy and the environmental file, needs to focus more on adaptation as opposed to mitigation. What's the difference between those two?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a conclusion I came to based on the work that I do rather than a particular belief. But so mitigation is the idea that that we can perhaps farm differently so that the emissions themselves will be reduced. Adaptation is focusing more on, well, look, the climate's going to change, and we are going to be subject to that in agriculture. We're vulnerable to it. So how do we change our practices or develop, assuming that that's going to happen, rather than trying to stop it from happening?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess if we are going to, currently we seem to be more focused on the mitigation side. What are the consequences of doing that? Why is that why is that betting on the wrong horse, so to speak?
Well, it's the issue of if you're doing mitigation at the exclusion of adaptation, that's a problem. It's an issue of focus and one of limited resources, right? So, and I go through a fair bit of data and evidence because I had to learn about this myself. I'm not a atmospheric scientist, so I had to learn about all this stuff. But it's a function of if you focus, you can't focus on everything, right? And as long as food is scarce in the world, which it is, and I think we need to keep really beating the drum on that because today's crop report, this week's futures market action, those kinds of things can obscure the fact that structurally over a period of time we have become scarce in food. Canada is one of the few countries that has significant surplus capacity to export, and as we can discuss here, it's pretty clear to me that Canada has actually benefited. Canadian agriculture specifically, is probably benefited by climate change. It doesn't make a lot of sense to turn around and impair that in some ways through mitigation. So for example, and these are voluntary measures, and I think that's important to recognize. But we have fertilizer targets. We've got targets around ruminants, grazing, etc. Again, voluntary. But look, it's people have said, agriculture is an important problem solver, and I believe that to the core. But what problems are we solving here? I mean, the problem that we can solve is that there's hungry people in the world, and we've got product to sell to them. If we take, we can solve other problems too, but then who's going to feed those people? And because that's a necessity, and it's a very important and urgent one, I think, Shaun.
So, give us some examples. What does adaptation? What does it look like? Like, I understand, because I'm a little bit more familiar with mitigation, but is it can be as simple as maybe growing different crops than we're used to, or give us some examples.
Well, that's a simple one. So as with warming, there are crops that will work and will mature in some areas where historically they would have been marginal or highly risky from doing so. There's areas that will become amenable to cultivation that historically were, too cold, too wet, too this or that. That could actually become feasible for, and for some of us it'll be hard to imagine that, but that could happen. The literature tells us basically that as you get warming in the world toward the extremes away from the equator, just as the crops will follow, the pests will follow too, right?
Is our commodity production system, our food production system, do you feel it's more resilient with an adaptation strategy over mitigation?
No, if I'm understanding you correctly, almost by definition, yes. Look, mitigation. We're going to have to do mitigation as a country, as a global population. We're going to have to do that. But this is a long game. This is decades and decades, right? One of the points that I think is genuinely the case is, again, and there's I think a growing body of evidence out there that points us in this direction. We have to have enough food to eat to get to the point where we can see the efficacy of the mitigation, because, like you say, it's decades, and it's not just Canada. So Canada, I looked, Canada is about 1.5% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, and of course, agriculture is about, with heating fuels and grain drying and so on, is about 10%. So we're 0.15. And I started to reflect on this, and I also went and by my calculations, when you look at staple agricultural products, so grains, oilseeds, meats, flour, not processed foods, just the staple ag products, we're about 5.5% of net exports in the world. Okay, so when we take our exports, subtract our imports out, divide that through by the total trade in the world, we're 5.5%, and that's needed. So to what degree is it prudent to chip away at the 5.5% to try and mitigate when you're only 0.15% to begin with? And those are just some points I put together. I hadn't particularly seen that written anywhere else, and I'm worried that we're not on that track.
It seems like the track that we're on is there's all hands on deck trying to focus on the mitigation, and to be fair, they're not mutually exclusive either, though, are they? Like
no, I think they're not, and I think one of the things that is kind of incumbent on us is let's look for the overlap. Like where can we kill two birds with one stone, for sure, and we should be doing that.
And I would imagine, like when you say, hey, that Canada is an example of a geography, a country that, from an agriculture perspective, benefits potentially economically from some of the outcomes of climate change or the changing climate, however you want to put that. I would imagine that there's some people that are going to give you major pushback on that kind of a statement. I don't know if you're admitting defeat, but there's some people that this is a cause. This is yes. This is a battle, right? And so it's an ideological, focus. So I imagine there's people that are going to have some pushback on that.
Yeah, I haven't had a Christmas card from Greta Thunberg, if that's what you're referring to.
Well, I didn't know I would.
Nor do I expect one. But it's maybe a bit of a nuanced point. Okay, so this I don't think there's anything here that says, climate change isn't happening. Well, no, we have the evidence that it is. We shouldn't try to mitigate. No, we should try to mitigate. But we've seemed to have gotten ourselves into this position where it's a whole of economy thing. Everybody throw a shoulder to the wheel and do his or her part, almost like a civic responsibility. But hang on, these are we're looking at different industries here. And there's many industries that certainly contribute through their emissions to the problem of climate change, but are not particularly affected by it.
Right.
Ours is. Farming is by definition. And, as I go through the paper and document a little bit of the experience elsewhere in the world, if you're close to the equator, is this weighing in on ag productivity? And yes, it is, and it's adverse, and that's not unexpected because what they're getting warmer and drier. Mm. So far, we're not. We're getting warmer and wetter. And there'd be a lot of people who are going to say, "Well, I haven't felt the warmth either." Well, the warmth is overwhelmingly in the winter. First of all, it's not, if you will, in the growing season.
Yeah. And
it's mostly in the north, not in agricultural areas. However, what the literature tells us is that it's subtle, but it's been enough to extend the growing season, right? So, for example, a real nice paper I read from some Ag Canada research scientists looking at corn heat units in Western Canada. And corn heat units in Western Canada are actually up markedly. I'd have to go back and remind myself what the time period is. And it's very clear in their results. What this is just due to a lengthening growing season.
Yeah, I think also a part of that is that the adaptation includes companies working on more drought tolerant varieties or hybrids.
Yes.
If you think about the fruit and vegetable industry, more cold tolerance when it comes, what we've seen happen to the cherry crop in the Okanagan Valley, as an example. Those are adaptations, and if and things that growers need as to create resilience in the growing in the growing season is be able to overcome some of those peaks and valleys from temperature. That temperature is just one thing. There's a lot of variables we face throughout.
There are. So you take. We've had episodes here in the last 10 years where you get this crazy warm weather in the month of March, all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And if you've got fruit trees and the buds start to burst, and then you turn around and get a freeze after that, well, you're done. That's your year. And actually with the grapevines or fruit trees, that you're done that year, and actually you have to worry about multi-year impairment in those shoots, and some of them die, right? So it's something that carries over a matter of years. There's other simple things that are affected by the climate, and we just take so many of these things for granted. Like, we run, so for example, this farm here, dairy farm, we figure on having a window of time that hay will dry in the field. And, that's well worn, and that speaks to your equipment, it speaks to your storage systems, etc. Well, what do you do when you start running into peak haying season and it rains every other day? It's nuts, and it's a lot of stress on people. And, over time, people will, they'll upgrade their machinery differently if that's the situation. You get into inoculants, you get into acids, you get into whatever you need to do to try and make this all work. But my point's not really the specific example, other than I think farmers, you tend to take a lot of things for granted, and when you have something that sideswipes you, like the evolution that we're experiencing here, like a lot of the basic assumptions that you farmed with your whole life, you have to call them into question.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, Al. Hey, Al, really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Radio. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Shaun.
We'll be right back on RealAg Radio. We'll be talking to Brian Innes of Soy Canada right after this.
How's your seed quality? What should you treat with? What about herbicide carryover and environmental concerns? Spring is here, and you've got a lot of things to think about in regards to your pulse crop. The Pulse School on Real Agriculture has information and advice for all these questions and more to help you navigate this season. Brought to you by BASF. Pulse School episodes are available at pulseschool.com, realagriculture.com, or as a podcast on your favorite streaming service. Download the latest episode today.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by Envita. We're joined by the Executive Director of Soy Canada. It is Brian Innes. Brian, great to chat with you.
You bet, Shaun. Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Well, hey, last week was the AGM for Soy Canada. What were some of the big outcomes of that meeting?
Yeah, well, it was a big meeting. It's our 10th anniversary this year, and so we did something special to go to a farm in northern Manitoba. So we had several dozen folks out at Sersky Farms to really reflect back on the 10 years that has been since Soy Canada was formed, and also think about where we want to go in the future.
Is it 10 years already? That is amazing.
Time flies.
Wow. Okay. So you're at the Sersky Farm and probably quite adjacent to a soybean field. What were some of the big issues, and what do you see as some of those priorities in the go forward?
Yeah. So as top of mind for farmers is always the weather today. And so in northern Manitoba, they've had double the amount of rain as normal, which creates a lot of risk for farmers, obviously. And so the reflection was how soybeans fit into a rotation that far north. And part of it is the joke that when it rains, the other crops suffer, but soybeans just keep drinking. And so that was the context where we were, where there's a lot of acres still not yet seeded in northern Manitoba, but yet for soybeans, it works well on that farm in particular. I think also when we reflect on where we are, there's interesting questions ahead of the industry on where we want to go together. When soybeans was formed 10 years ago, it was really about how the industry comes together across the country and across the value chain to do things that any one segment couldn't do on their own, or if they could, it would cost them more to do so. And so when we came together last week, it was about, here we are. Wow, this has been amazing over the last 10 years, but where do we want to go from here? And that's where conversations around gene editing came up, conversations around protein and quality in Western Canada, and also conversations about how we want to work together to prevent trade issues.
Do you still see the potential for major acreage expansion in soybeans in Western Canada like we did a number of years ago? Is that still possible?
It's not just possible, it's actually likely. And it's likely because the varieties are continuing to get better. And also, farmers are generally seeing more heat and longer growing seasons, which means that for them to manage their risk and take advantage of that growing season, adding a crop like soybeans into the rotation can really help. I think where the industry's come in the last 10 years is to be more realistic, that soybeans are a crop that thrives with heat and moisture. And so looking at Western Canada, areas on the black soil zone when they're in a wet trend make a lot of sense for farmers.
Yeah, that does make sense. Now, you mentioned gene editing, and I'm curious, this is something that the industry has been fighting for and pushing for, and of course now is possible as of recently in Canada. What role does gene editing play in the development of varieties and soybeans in Canada?
Great question, Shaun. You know, we reflected on that, and what I would share with you is there's really two thoughts. On the one hand, Canada is a small part of the global market for soybeans, whether that's genetics or exports. And so naturally, one might think if you're going to commercialize something, you're going to do it in a place that has a lot more soybeans. On the other hand, Canada has a real advantage in a world-leading identity preserve system. So in the world that we see, where we've got small, medium, and even some large companies investing in soybean genetics through gene editing, they're able to produce a soybean that would meet particular market needs. And in Canada, we're really well set up to keep that separate, to deliver it to the customer and not prevent risk for the rest of the soybean industry.
So you see gene editing playing a role in Canadian soybean production?
Well, absolutely. And I think how it rolls out will really be driven by market demand. And so today, there's been a lot of announcements, but not a real crystallization of market demand. But we know, for example, that our Canadian seed companies have gene-edited genetics in their pipeline. And so when we look out, if we take an example of what we're able to do with gene editing to increase protein in soy, that has real advantages for the food grade industry, for example. And so when we look at markets in Southeast Asia that can be delivered in a container for a channel customer who wants higher quality, higher protein levels in their soy and can get that at a competitive advantage through a gene editing variety that works better for farmers and doesn't have as much premium associated with it, for example, those are real opportunities for us. We have 18 exporters around the table at Soy Canada and a real opportunity to use our 40,000 containers a year that we export in soybeans to channel it to the customers who would value that.
Yeah, because in the pulse sector, there's been some recent discussion about, caution that, we don't want to disrupt exports and creating disruption because there would be gene-edited varieties, even though they are not GM. There seems to be some caution, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm not necessarily as detecting that from a soybean perspective from you.
Well, the caution is to make sure that we can continue to export organic soy, non-GM soy, identity preserved soy, as well as GM soy to places like Europe and China that may not approve these gene-edited varieties in the near term. So that is a real caution for all of the grain industry. Where we come at it from in the soybean industry is that we are experts at identity preservation. We do that right now with about 1.3 million tons of non-GM soy. We have 100 varieties of food-grade soy that we deliver that specific variety from the farm to the processing plant to the customer. So we have a real strength here, and when we commercialize gene-edited soy, it will really be driven by that market demand.
You mentioned trade disruption previously as one of the things that Soy Canada is working on. What are the, I guess, what are the main files when it comes to trade disruption right now in regards to Canadian soybeans?
Well, great question, Shaun. We spend a lot of time in the Indo-Pacific. We just had our annual mission to Japan and Thailand this year. And so it's simple things like how we can get electronic phytosanitary certificates to keep up with our cousins to the south. That's sounds like a easy thing to fix, but when you're working with government, things can sometimes take more time than you like. Also, when we're looking at how other risks in the Indo-Pacific, whether it's weed seeds or plant disease, are managed in Southeast Asia, and we're continuing to engage with those countries through the Indo-Pacific Agriculture Office to proactively manage those and prevent them from creating risk and stopping our exports.
So digital phytosanitary certificates, what if the Americans have them and Canada does not, and why not?
Great question, Shaun. Well, sometimes it just takes government a long time to put new systems in place. I think
the U.S. has government too, and the industry is massively bigger. So you're trying to get a lot more cats herded in that regard. So you think smaller industry would be able? This would be simpler, or am I not looking at this appropriately?
Well, we agree with you, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're coming together as a grain industry, including ourselves and the Western Grain Elevator Association and others, to take a concerted approach with government alongside the Canada Grains Council. I think that was also part of the nature of our discussion last week. Was sometimes we have issues that are soybean specific, but many times they cross commodities. And so how we work with others through the Grains Council, for example, presents a real opportunity for us. So to your question, we're not quite sure why Canada's having such a difficult time, but we're working on it.
Well, hey, Brian, congratulations on the 10 years. If I had to, time flies, because if I was to bet, I would have said 6 to 8. So 10 blows me away. So congratulations on 10 years of soybean or Soy Canada, I should say. It's that's quite the milestone. And there is obviously, like as you've indicated and laid out, a bright future for soybeans in Canada going forward.
Yeah, we're really seeing it. There's a lot of optimism around the table, around the board table, and with our members. So I don't think we've ever had a time where people have been so engaged in what we can do together. So that's exciting for a person like myself to come to work and work for the success of the industry 10 years and hopefully a lot longer than that into the future.
Yeah, great stuff. Hey, Brian, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Shaun.
That was Brian Ennis, Executive Director with Soy Canada. Yeah, 10 years. Wow. Time does fly. Hey, I want to thank you for joining us here today. Today's show brought to you by Envita. Make sure you ask your local retailer about Envita. Getting access to that nitrogen from the atmosphere when and when you need it. Very, very important stuff. So check out Envita and make sure you ask for it no matter where you are farming, Canada or the U.S., of course. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find us across all the social media platforms as Real Agriculture, or you are more than welcome. We would love you and invite you to call the Real Ag Feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. And, of course, we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.